Thank you for being here for Equity in Education Using Data to Inform Practice. And I should see, yep, there she is. And so some of the key pillars of practice that we're going to highlight in today's session come from the PDE Equity Pillars of Practice. And these are the ones we selected specifically because we find that they connect directly to the purpose of data. They are general equity practices, self-awareness, and data practices. And so, who are we? I'll start. My name is Dr. Nicole Holland Sims. I'm an educational consultant for the Pennsylvania Training and Technical Assistance Network, PATN or PATAN, out of the Harrisburg office. I'm a certified school psychologist. I'm an alum of Millersville University and also obtained my doctorate from Indiana University of Pennsylvania. I'm a wife. I'm a boy mom to who I affectionately call a three-nager, CJ. I am an only child. I'm my mom's only child, but I have two half brothers. I'm a Virgo, so you can probably guess my personality type. And I live near the sweetest place on earth, which is Hershey, Pennsylvania. So just very happy to be here today. And now going to turn it over to my friend and colleague, Dr. Sessoms.
Good morning. I'm Dr. Amber Sessoms, and there's a lot of similarities between Dr. Nicole Holland Sims and I, right? So I just retired from Central Dauphin as a school psychologist there for almost 13 years. And now I'm the principal and founder of Natural Inclination, LLC. And what I do is I work with courageous leaders and really helping to create environments that can create spaces of belonging and safety for everyone, and really working with people to be their full authentic selves. So I'm a nationally certified school psychologist, an alumna of Millersville. So Nicole and I went there undergrad together, and she's a year ahead of me. And then also we both went there to get our school psychology certification as well. I have got my doctorate at Penn State University. I'm a wife. I'm a girl mom of three. I have a senior, a sixth grader, and a kindergartner. So all three ranges. Only child, so I'm the only child raised by my grandparents, but I do have other brothers and sisters between my mom and my dad. I'm an Aries, so guessing my personality as well. And I live literally up the road from the sweetest place on earth.
So yeah, we're kindred spirits for sure.
Yeah.
And I think it's important, and one thing that Dr. Sessoms has really empowered me around is being authentic in telling your story. And so we wanted to open with who we are so that you get a sense more of how we represent, who we represent, and what this work means to us. And we would want you to also think about, if you had to do this same slide for yourself, what are some of those indicators that make you who you are? Self-awareness as one of those key pillars is something that Dr. Sessoms is going to take us in a deeper dive around, but this is the start of that process. Just unpacking on a surface level what makes you you. And so, as we enter into now the practices that we're going to highlight in the time that we have with you, we are going to say that if you do have questions, obviously, please feel free to use the chat. However, we have a short amount of time to get through a lot of content. So if we don't get to your question today, we do have our emails at the end to please feel free to contact us if we don't get that opportunity. So the first one that we're going to highlight is general equity practices. And you may say, general equity practices, well, doesn't that just mean everything we do? Sort of, but what we're going to highlight is how important it is to really distinguish how general equity practices can be really systemic and large, and how we can narrow them down into what we'll talk about in the remaining parts of the session. Just to sort of ground our efforts, Governor Wolf in 2016, around the time of the presidential election, put out the following statement. And this was as a result of the polarizing dynamics in our country that have continued on today, where we need to talk about the importance of equity in our schools. He talks about how Pennsylvania was founded on tolerance, religious freedom, and justice, that these are values that we should continue to embrace, and that we need to create cultures of inclusiveness at schools where students are made to feel welcome and valued, and that we celebrate diversity and teach the importance of respect for self and others. So with that being said, Governor Wolf gave a charge to the Department of Education around how will we put equity to the forefront of everything that we do. The reason this slide is here is to showcase that when I, in particular, when my colleagues like Dr. Sessoms and others that I know are on this particular session, go out and train around equity and what it means in schools, we often hear some of the quotes that you see on the slide. And we wanted to bring light to that. Dr. Sessoms often says we have to name it. And so in naming it, these are some of the things that we hear consistently that we have to almost unlearn for folks about what equity really means. Oftentimes it gets pigeonholed into one thing. So you'll hear things like it's a new buzzword, it's overplayed. I've heard people say, I'm tired of talking about equity. Why do we have to do that? And when we think about what equity really means, and this is the issue, sometimes there's not a clear understanding of what equity actually means in practice. And that's what we hope to accomplish with you today, is to give you some tools or some things to think about in your particular catchments or your districts, that when you look at data, what mindset can you apply? I'm moving away from saying an equitable lens, because recently I've heard that with lenses, you can take them on and off, like glasses or contact lenses. A mindset allows you to shift not only your view, but your thoughts and then your actions. So, using that equitable mindset is so critical. We also hear things like, we aren't doing equity, we're focused on trauma and mental health. Actually, all of those things are equitable practices. And so we can't just say we're doing one without the other. Those silos we can no longer approach in that way. And the last one we hear all the time, here's one more thing. Where can I go to check this off a box? I'm hopeful that the reason that you decided to join us for this session is to begin your journey or to enhance the journey that you're already on, knowing that the journey is ongoing. It's not a one stop, it's not a finish line that you get to. It's a journey that takes a lot of time, and systems change in education, we know, takes about 5 to 7, if not 7 to 10 years for real sustainability to occur. So I just want to make that clear. The other one before I move on is equity does not apply to me. We're a rural district. We don't have racial diversity. I hear that a lot. And I often wonder if it's because I'm the messenger, simply because as a Black woman, when I present on this information, sometimes it's seen as pushing an agenda or trying to brainwash people, when in reality, what I'm talking about is impacting the whole. So even if there's not racial diversity in a particular district, that doesn't mean equity still can't live there. You have a lot of different students of different backgrounds or experiences that benefit from equity just as much. In addition to that, we need all of our students to know how to interact and interface with people that are different from them. So regardless of that, if that diversity is there or not, that is such an important component of teaching students how to become productive citizens in the world. So, we talk a lot about what is equity. Well, what are the inequities? Sometimes when we think of inequities, we think of it as just maybe discipline. So, we know there are a lot of students of color who are being disciplined at a higher rate than other students. However, that's one inequity that's in education. There are multiple, and that's where this slide really highlights those. In particular, too, we have over on the right hand side the spotlight being shown on COVID-19 and civil unrest, because that is what we're living in right now. And so when I hear it's a buzzword, it does feel like one, because you're hearing it constantly because of inequities that finally came to the forefront for a lot of people as a result of those two major, as Tyrone Howard would say, the double tsunamis. They're not even pandemics, they're tsunamis, because they're overpowering us in a lot of ways. And so when we look over on the left, this is just a list of the types of inequities that happen in education. So, societal. These are things that help shape our bias and our vision and the lenses that we approach different people with. So, society tells us certain things about certain people. We begin to hold those biases. That creates societal inequities, because our bias, when left unchecked, can create disproportionate outcomes. We also have socioeconomic inequity. So we know the haves and the have nots. If certain students live on a certain part of the district or from a certain neighborhood, we know sometimes the expectations are lower, or we don't expect much from them. There's a dichotomy that comes with being a student and then also having a low socioeconomic status as well. Cultural inequity, familial inequity, the list can go on. And I'm not going to take time to go through each one, but I want to highlight just a few. When we think about data in particular, assessment inequity, instructional inequity, and programmatic inequity. So, programmatically, how do we determine which students go to which specific courses, for instance? Or which students are then eligible for, let's say, special education? Those are programs that we have within our structures that, when not done well, or when always leaning towards certain groups, creates inequities in our system. When we look at data, that data often informs us on where certain students do need to receive certain supports. Instructionally, as well, which teachers are the most highly qualified, and are we putting the most highly qualified teachers in front of our neediest students? And then from a school psych lens and assessment inequity, we think about the fact that when we evaluate students and we determine, let's say, their intellectual ability or their achievement ability, those assessments in and of themselves are biased in nature. And so we may have made some probably missteps as far as identifying students that weren't really cognizant or responsive to their cultural backgrounds and experiences. So, those continuous inequities create a cycle that our systems have become so familiar with that it's hard to even notice them because we're swimming in the water. So, what is equity? I've shared what inequities are and how they manifest in our school systems, but what is the definition? So, in Pennsylvania, equity has been defined as every student having access. That's a key word. If you've not really unpacked what equity means, that's a key word I want you to hold on to. Every student having access to the educational resources and rigor they need at the right moment in their education across. And you can fill in the blank with whatever category resonates for you or intersects for you. So, race, gender, ethnicity, language, disability, sexual orientation, family background, family income. We could add religion, we could add gender identity here as well. But the key word that I again want you to hold on to is access. So, during this time of COVID, we've talked about access to Wi Fi, access to technology. Access is larger than that. Access goes beyond curriculum. It speaks to an environment where you can be successful, where you have a sense of belonging, where you can be your authentic self and feel safe. And so I want you to think about access in many ways, that it's vast, and that that is what we want every student to have at their disposal in our systems. And so, some key messaging that I would want you to take from today is that equity is multi tiered systems of support. I'm recognizing some of the names in our audience as administrators in the field who I know understand this concept. The reason why we put this here is because oftentimes equity is seen as the add on, when in reality, it should encompass everything that we do. It should be the fabric of everything that we put in place in our system. The best way for that to happen is through a multi tiered system of support. So, as you can see in the logo, that tiered triangle, in education, we got to have a shape of some kind. There's that triangle for you. So, when we said in that definition about meeting students at that right moment, that's the tiered structure that creates the right moment for those needs to be addressed. Within that framework, we have to be trauma informed. We have to focus on a positive school climate and also career readiness, because our ultimate goal in education is to create self regulated learners. And with that self regulation, having self awareness, having the ability to engage with other people that are different. And the purpose of this messaging is to dismantle the silos that we know exist within our systems. And so, what are the pillars of practice? I've mentioned earlier that we're going to cover three of them today, but the pillars of practice essentially align to the PDE Equitable Practices Hub, which I'll show you in a moment. But each of these pillars have a specific purpose in the work around the equity journey. So, for some districts or LEAs, you may be starting your journey at self awareness, which is what I would recommend. If you're new to this work, if you've never even talked about what equity is or what it means, understanding not only yourself, but how your system is at that granular level, how responsive that system is or not, is a key component of self awareness. Once you engage in that, then we can move into data practices, which we'll talk about in a moment, how you can really unpack through that equity mindset what the data is telling you. For sake of time, I'm not going to go through each one of these, but please understand that these pillars are very clear as far as how you can apply an equitable mindset to each one. Academic equity speaks back to what I highlighted earlier about programming, about instruction, about what the classroom system looks like. Disciplinary equity speaks to suspension, expulsion, positive school climate, why students don't feel that they belong. That's a pillar that definitely cannot be understated. And then the top one is general equity practices, and that just simply means systemically. How are we hiring people? How are we creating a space where the adults in the system are able to function and be able to engage in equitable decision making? And the one that I neglected to share is family and community engagement. Dr. Heather Bennett, who is a colleague of ours and works for the Pennsylvania School Board Association, is their equity director. One comment that she's made recently that has really stuck with me is that with policy in our schools, with school directors in particular, typically that comes from a federal or a local or a state government agency that kind of delineates what that policy could be. With equity policies, however, families and communities drive those policies. And so that engagement, that stakeholder input is critical to ensuring that you're being equitable. And so, with that, just so that you're aware, in September of 2020, the Equitable Practices Hub was released through the Pennsylvania Department of Education. For sake of time, again, I'm not going to go through this entire infographic, but this is available to you in the PowerPoint that was provided, as well as the website link. And please engage in this. We think it would be really helpful to your overall efforts. And with that, I'll turn it over to Dr. Sessoms.
Thank you. So she touched upon so many things in thinking about self-awareness. And one of the biggest things I think, Nicole, that you really emphasized was talking about our positionality, right? So when we're doing this work, thinking about how I show up in the world, thinking about what I look like and what that brings to the work. So where it gets really iffy, it's like, well, you're talking a lot about race. And I was in a session last week listening to Dr. Rosemary Allen, in which she said really stuck with me. Because this is what we hear, right? Because usually it's Black and brown bodies doing this work, is that, oh, you're just talking about race. He's like, it's not just about race, but it's always about race. And if you look at any data point, right, you will see that. So that's why we have to be really clear when we're talking about self-awareness, that we have to get really comfortable with being uncomfortable. So that's a lot of the work that I do. Next slide, please. So just looking at this, right? So I have a 3D Power Tools framework that I'm working through with clients in school districts. And what we do is we go on this journey together. We're looking at the power of devaluation. And when you're thinking about that, and in all three of these different modules here, what you're really looking at is really recognizing biases that exist, recognizing the history, or as I like to say, the historicity of race. We really start there at that value gap that Dr. Eddie Glaude talks about from Princeton University. We talk about opportunity gaps, but really looking at this value gap and who's valued and devalued in our society and how that really has a historical emphasis is really key. So recognizing that. And then you're working on the power of disruption so that you're able to really start addressing it, right? You're really starting to be able to say, what do I need to do? Like when this shows up, I hear that a lot from people. I don't know what to say. I don't know how to have the conversation. I don't want to say the wrong thing. So we can work through that together and really what you need to say to disrupt it in real time. I'm always about do it in real time because it sends a really clear message to those when things are happening that if you don't do it in real time, if you go and have a private conversation, you send a very clear message to people in that space. So it needs to be handled in that space. And that's a part of being vulnerable. That's a part of having these courageous conversations. And then also looking then at the power of divesting from that. So when you work through these steps, what we're really trying to get to, and what I said earlier, is really being your full and authentic self, really going through that journey and then getting to this freedom dreaming that Dr. Bettina Love and Dr. Dina Simmons talk about. So next slide. So I'll just show you a little bit of how we work through this together as a team. So looking at the power of evaluation, there's an essential question here, and it's really about how does the inception of a body hierarchy inform my current thoughts, beliefs, and practices? So again, going through the history and really starting at that value gap, looking at the body hierarchy, Sonia Renee Taylor talks about this default body, and we'll look at that. Like looking at the intersectionality of those things are really key, and you might have heard that terminology come up a lot for you, but really understanding the nuances of that and the history of that and how the multiple layers of oppression that can come from certain identities is really going to be key to how you're driving your services and the data points that you're looking at. So looking at that, so what we really do with teams is that measuring stick there is a really invisible measuring stick. That is the default body that we all in our society are trying to conform to. So what happens is if you're at the top there, you have a lot of privilege in our society, right? Now we can play the oppression Olympics all day. I like to talk about that because, oh, well, of course, I'm a woman, strike, I'm Black, strike. But I also have a whole lot of privilege, right? So my degree attainment, my class status, even looking at my fertility. So often in looking at teams, I talk to people and I'm always brought back to a friend of mine when you look at this and talking about fertility and how she could not have children naturally. She didn't have any eggs. So she had to get an egg donor to have children. And what happens for her is that, oh, well, you're 40 years old, you're married, you should be having children by now. Why are you not having children? It's not that she didn't want to, she wasn't able to. And then also thinking about people that they just don't want to. But in our society, right, we just have this really just candid approach and saying like, this is what should be happening. And if you don't follow in line with this model of that we've established in this invisible measuring stick, then therefore there's something wrong with you. You're othered in a sense. And it really makes you question your identity and your sense of belonging. And if you think about belonging, from a student perspective, we understand that as the number one reason kids will leave school. They drop out, right? Because they don't feel a sense of connection to the school. They don't feel like they belong. So looking at how do you have the implicit culture, the explicit culture in your school building that really makes students feel like they don't belong. Your students that are below that line, right? They either have an option here of saying, I'm just going to conform. I'm just going to leave that part of my identity at the door when I walk through because I don't want to deal with the sense of otherness. I don't want to deal with constantly people gawking at me and being hyper visible. So I'm going to try to make parts of my identity invisible. And what does that do to children, right? So you think about Dr. Dina Simmons, who will be at the IU conference this week, be keynoting and ending out the conference, and she talks about spirit murdering. What does that do to a child? What does that do to a staff member that comes from a minoritized group, that they have to leave parts of who they are out of that community where they spend most of their time because they understand that it's not safe for them to bring their full selves? So thinking about all of those things and where it shows up for you will also help you to look at the blind spots that you might have, because when you're in the privilege, you don't live in a world that says, oh, well, I'm going to constantly show a mirror up to you. When you live from a place of privilege, when I look at issues of class or my degree or that I am English speaking, it sometimes will leave some gaps out when I'm thinking about how I navigate and how I interact with other people, that I have to make sure that there are other people in my circle that can speak to that, and understanding that people that come from these marginalized groups can speak from a place of wisdom. So when they speak their truth, believe them because they're telling you the truth. We don't know because we have those biases, those gaps, but they are speaking the truth, and we need all these different intersections at the table to make informed decisions. And also thinking about, again, disrupting that. So how am I complicit? Again, here's the thing, right? We're not focusing on the individual, the families. We're focusing on ourselves. So when you're asking these questions, you're looking at your organization. What are we doing that's maintaining these inequities? We're not looking at the kids as the problem, right? So we're problematizing this. We're really working through these questions and really asking tough questions that make us self-reflect on how we're engaging in policies and practices and our culture that maintains these things. And part of that is, we'll go to the next slide, is really looking at being mindful. And here's the work, right? So when I work with clients, again, most people say, I want to do this work. I want to have these difficult conversations. And then when they're presented with the conversations, they freeze up, right? We don't ever give you the opportunity to have these conversations. And it's really about practicing and recognizing your thoughts and your emotions. So you can go through this RAIN. This is modified from Tara Brach. She's a mindfulness guru, a yogi, right? But it's really helpful as you're going through and recognizing your thoughts and your emotions. And you can click there. You'll have access to this. When I start every session, I really start with looking at your emotions and naming it. There's really power in naming what you're feeling, whatever it is, right? Because your feelings can't make you do anything. And they ebb and flow, they change, they're never permanent. But allowing yourself the time to really let your emotions just be is really key in this work, because we live in a society that tells us to numb our pain, that tells us to deflect from it. And in this work, if you're really trying to be anti-racist, if you're really trying to ensure that you're doing equitable practices, you have to really get uncomfortable again with being get comfortable with being uncomfortable. That discomfort is really going to help you to build the capacity to do this work. Without that, you're not going to get anywhere because those defensive posturing, that defensiveness will come up for you and it will start blocking you from doing the real systemic work that needs to be done. So you're investigating when those things show up for you, right? Just sitting with that. And then you're nourishing those needs. And there's a hyperlink there where you can see the different needs that we have. And you're thinking about Maslow's hierarchy. What do you need? How's that showing up for you? But also, then we're going to refocus, right? And stop centering ourselves. I always talk about decentering yourself in this work. We live in a society that's very individualistic. It's very much about us and what we need. And we don't focus enough on what other groups of people need, especially minoritized groups. So thinking about what they need, if you're meeting those needs, this is something that Nicole touched upon earlier, you're going to benefit everyone. Throughout history, when we have benefited, right, the least of these, it benefits all. And we are not going to get anywhere as a society if we continue to advance a certain particular group of people and leave others behind, because our liberation is all inextricably tied together. Next slide. And then the final thing that I really talk about is divesting. And this is where you really get to the freedom dreaming, really start thinking about the stories that we tell ourselves that we have just been indoctrinated with in our society that we don't even realize. So, right, we are both school psychologists, so we think about this from that lens as well. Like, a lot of this work is really therapeutic and therapy in general. So you're thinking about disrupting those thoughts that are in your mind, that narrative that's constantly running. We have thoughts, we have stories that we tell ourselves daily. So when you can get through looking at the history, when you can get to the level of recognizing it, then you can start redressing it and saying, oh, there it is. And now I know what I need to say. I know where it comes from because I've named the foundation of that. And now I can move on to really divesting from that and looking at the collective compassion that we need to have and freedom dreaming, which is really hard because we're in a society that says, oh, this is how we have to do education. So one of the things I love that Nicole talks about is that COVID and the civil unrest has given us a problemtunity. And I will be completely honest, I've been really upset by some of the progress or lack of progress in this time, where we really could have looked at the system of education in particular and dismantled it, changed it, and really moved on, divested from it to look at something different. But because we're so ingrained to think about education in one way, it's really hard for us to do that work. But again, that's bringing other people to the table that can really think about the system for what it is and say, that doesn't serve me. I need you to do something different. Bringing those people to the table that don't have the education background, that education hasn't served them, will help you to divest from that and work on freedom dreaming.
So I just have to say, Dr. Sessoms is the school psychologist of the year, and I hope that you can so understand why she is. The work that she just highlighted is hard work, it's heart work, it's really, really in depth, and I just appreciated her taking us through that because I think it helps to really ground you in what this work has to be. It can't be a checkbox, and I think she articulated that so well that it has to go beyond what we just expect things to be in schools. That brings us to data practices. So we joke, but we're going to double dutch this one. I'm going to kind of lead it and then ask Dr. Sessoms to jump in whenever she'd like to, because I think it's nice to have that toggle between the two of us. Me coming from a more state level systemic way, Amber coming at it from practitioner, but also now working with districts more wholeheartedly, and how we can share examples from both of our experiences with this. So, who's the author of the data story? And I love this quote, even when our quote, this question, even when we were developing this, I remember Amber saying that question, and I was like, oh my gosh, that is it. That is what we have to get to. And our colleague, Dr. Jason Peterson from Derry Township, he literally just did a session on data doesn't lie, but do we?
Yes,
And I
powerful.
just, yeah, and I just really latched onto that because this goes back to that mindset. If you're looking at the data through a mindset that says deficit or that seeks out to confirm your bias, the data story is going to look one way for you, and it will be different than the data story that it may appear to be to myself or to Amber. So when we're going through this, I want you to think about the data stories that you've seen or heard through the data dives you've done, and also applying some of those mindset shifts that Amber highlighted earlier. How do you start to wrestle with some of the things that may cause you some dissonance? And in understanding that dissonance, what are you willing to do to build your coalition of the willing, or your army, your volunteer army, to support you in those efforts? Anything you want to add?
No, that coalition of willing. I love when you say that because that's so key, right? You can't do this work on your own. And we try, right? And you get weary and you're like, I need to tap out. I need someone to take it to take over. But building that coalition is really key to doing this work because it's hard work. And we're asking people to be vulnerable and to confront some ugly truths about our nation and about ourselves that we don't do, right? We just kind of hide things. So that coalition and having people in your corner to really support you in this work and to have a clear vision is really key. And that's how you make it sustainable.
Absolutely. So, one of the things that when I'm training around data practices is to talk about this concept of downward spiral conversations and upward spiral conversations. I'm probably preaching to a big chunk of a choir here in sitting at data team tables and engaging, whether we realize it or not, in downward spiral conversations. And so, what does this sound like? It's blaming, it's finding fault with either the student, with the family, with the community. It's that thought about them or those kids, which, if you are still saying those kids, if you leave with nothing else today, stop saying those
Yes.
kids. And how they need to change. Not so much what the system or what we ourselves could do to change, but finding fault with their approach, with the way that they talk, with the way that they dress, and wanting them to fit in or assimilate to dominant culture. And so downward spiral conversations happen all the time, and they can be really small. Something as simple as, well, their dad drinks. That's the beginning, if not the start, of a downward spiral conversation that can then continue to be a problem admiration experience, which is not at all what we want. Amber, any examples you want
Yeah.
to share?
Well, I think about when you're thinking about, then I'm going back to Dr. Dina Simmons and talking about social emotional learning without equity as white supremacy with the hug. So when we're thinking about Be Kind initiatives, and I'm in a particular school district that talks about Be Kind, that can be really problematic because again, going back to that intersectionality and that default body, that dominant culture, that what we're trying to send messages to kids that are different, that don't fit the norm, is that they have to assimilate in order to be successful. And that is so harmful to Black and brown bodies, people that are have different disabilities. It is harmful to say this is how you have to fit in because I'm already navigating space all day long and having to disrupt those messages that I don't belong, that I am not lovable, that I am not smart enough. All of those things are constant messages that go on in minoritized groups' heads. So for you to tell them, well, if you just play by the game, you'll get ahead. That is really harmful language. So thinking about what are the implicit and explicit cultures in your building, even when you walk in the door, what's in your bookcases, right? I think about when you walk in most places, it's sports. And the former district I worked in, we had a very awesome art department, and those kids never felt like they belonged because everything was just really dominated by athletics. So really thinking about how you're making sure all your student groups feel like they belong and that they're included is really key.
Hmm. For sure. The flip of downward spiral conversations would be upward spiral. And so, Randall Lindsay, who's written a book, many volumes now, around culturally responsive leadership, really talks about how important it is to assess culture and its impact, which Dr. Sessoms just highlighted so clearly, that it's sometimes a hidden curriculum or a hidden culture that exists in our systems. And if you don't know it, you're bound to misstep. And in misstepping, it others you. So it's important to know what some of those hidden practices are. But upward spiral conversations really speak to growing your competence. So whether that's through your practice, whether that's through your policy development, but ultimately your behavior. So the actions. It's one thing to talk the talk, but what do your actions really say? And that's what these bullets indicate. So knowing the culture and its impact on everyone, valuing diversity. So it's not just simply saying, let's have a diversity day. It's much bigger than that. And one of our friends and colleagues, Dr. Erica McDowell, talks about just having diversity by itself means nothing, because by itself, you're just saying, yep, we got someone who looks different, but you haven't provided an opportunity for the voice to be heard, and you haven't provided that opportunity upon hearing the voice to change what you're doing. And so, in valuing diversity, we want diverse voices, but we also have to nurture those voices when they come to the table in a space that's vulnerable. And that's managing dynamics constructively. It's not saying, well, just because you said it that way and I don't agree, now I don't want you at that meeting anymore. It's being able to say, how can I find a middle ground where we can have a dialogue and we can actually call in or call out each other and engage in a process that brings about movement? That then speaks to institutionalizing cultural knowledge. So once we know better, we do better, right? So once we have that understanding, how do we then put it into practice and policy? Because we know that people drive policy, which drive practices. So with all three of those P's at play, that's the institutionalization of cultural knowledge that you've gleaned by being culturally humble. And one thing I want to say is that when we refer to culture, which Dr. Sessoms has said, it's students with disabilities, it's students who are homeless, it's students who have incarcerated parents, it's Black and brown bodies. All of those things represent cultures. And so I just want you to think about that, and also the intersections that we highlighted earlier. When we talk about all of the different people that are in our classrooms, we have to think about what are we doing to ensure that all students are receiving access and what they need.
Yeah, I think what you just said there is really touching upon that all of those different things and how they intersect our culture. And the thing that I invite you to really start thinking about is when you're thinking about diversity, asking yourself, diverse from what? Because when you
Right.
really get to that question, where does that leave you? Diverse from what? So again, it gets back to the default. And what I think happens, what I know happens, right, in this work is that white people, or those that come from a really strong place of privilege, don't find themselves in this work. They think they're out here and they don't have any business doing it, or that it's not about them. It's a Black and brown issue, it's a disability issue, and they don't see themselves at the table. And that's the harmful part about how our society has been constructed, because you think, oh, this is not for me. I don't have any stake in this. Yes, you do. But diverse from what really gets to this culture of understanding that whiteness is a culture, whiteness is a race, and we really have to start unpacking that. And I just invite you right in this moment to start really thinking about, where is that showing up for you when I'm saying this? I talk a lot about, like, where's it showing up in your body, right? So I know I get tense literally before the session. I had a neck massager on. So tension here, you get it in your chest. Where is it showing up for you, and recognizing that so you can name that. When I'm saying whiteness, when I'm talking about race in my Black body, what does that do to you? And what do you start thinking? And what are the narratives that start going on in your head? And what do you start doing to maybe shift and start being like, this is not for me? And really starting to really engage and being like, I'm going to really stay present in this conversation, because I want to build capacity to make sure that I'm doing good work so that I can see everyone's humanity, right? Because this is about seeing everyone as a human being, and that I can show up to be my full self.
Mhm. So, when we think of data, and we just gave you two examples of how you can kind of get to a fork in the road when you're looking at data. You could either go in a downward spiral conversation, which doesn't often lead to any solution, or an upward spiral conversation, which allows you to take some ownership of the institutional system. One piece that is often neglected, that I know Amber and I both can relate to in working with teams, is this concept of root cause analysis. It sounds easy enough, and most people would say, well, you should do that. Why wouldn't you do that? Sometimes we're very much data rich and information poor. So we're data rich. We have a ton of sources where we can pull data from, and we look at it, and we may look at it one time a year, two times a year, and go, yep, we know who's struggling and who's not, and we're done. We may make some shifts here and there, but we just know those students are going to be our bubble kids, and we might have to work a little bit with them, but we're not really sure. Root cause analysis creates a process where you have to really introspectively look at that data, whether it's qualitative and or quantitative, And I think that's an important piece too, because sometimes we often go to quantitative and say, this is the only data that gives us what we need. When there's a lot of qualitative data that we get on a consistent basis that can help substantiate or disconfirm what the quantitative data is saying. And more often than not, and this is a quote from Edward Fergus, who's one of the premier researchers around this whole process of equity in data, he says that a root cause analysis really reveals the systematic nature of how practice and policy gaps can allow the presence of bias based beliefs about marginalized populations to essentially serve as the reason why there's disproportionality. So it becomes that downward spiral conversation if we don't address the root cause. And so he'll talk about, and we'll showcase in a moment, the importance of belief gaps versus process gaps and how those two things can't live alone. They have to exist together for us to really start to make systematic shifts. Anything you want to add there?
No, that was perfect. Thank
Okay.
you.
So this was a good one. We love this slide in particular because we think it's important for you to have an understanding of the full process that you go through when you engage in root cause analysis. So at level one, you have the outcome data. This is the larger system data. So the magnitude, the timing, the location, the outcome pattern. So I'm a PBIS person by nature. So some of you that may engage in PBIS work might be familiar with our school-wide information system, or SWIS. Swiss at tier one gives you that level one data. So as a PBIS team, we may sit down monthly and look at that system-wide data and say, we know students are having difficulty with, let's say, fighting at recess at 12 noon, and we're able to drill down the exact time, location, where, why, and how. Okay, that's level one. Level two takes us to process data. And this is where that drill down becomes even more intricate. So we define the practice and the policy artifacts and how they become modus operandi. So this is what we always do when this happens. So we have a code of conduct. When this behavior happens, this is the consequence. What we need to do at process data is figure out, is that a responsibility that we have put on the child rather than our system and how we respond to those infractions, to those outcomes, etc. So that allows us to define the gaps in practices and policies. And again, from PBIS world, what I can share is that there's an equity report in Swiss that allows you to look at disproportionate outcomes by risk ratio. If you've never heard of risk ratio, it essentially gives you the likelihood of a certain group receiving an outcome compared to another group. That's level two process data. Once I know that ratio, then unpacking what could be some of the behaviors. So for instance, disrespect, defiance, and disruption are considered the 3 Ds of behavior for subjectivity. Kent
Okay.
McIntosh says that subjectivity, or I'm sorry, subjectivity, no, I got thrown off because I think someone unmuted. Sorry.
Dr. Hollis, it was actually me. Sorry for interrupting. I just wanted to let you know you have 15 minutes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, you're welcome.
All right. So with that, Dr. Kent McIntosh says that ambiguity is disproportionality's best friend. And so when we have subjective behaviors or subjective policies, it allows for biased beliefs to take root. And so then at level three, we have name the root causes, which are to define the connections between gaps in that process data and that outcome data. And Dr. Sessoms, I don't know if you want to jump in, but you posed this question of where do we get stuck?
Right. Where do we get stuck? So we're really used to looking at quantitative data, and you're thinking back to how we always do things. You said that, and it struck a nerve in me, right? Like when you're talking about level two, like we always do it like this, and we don't like change. But when we look at the data, we're showing that this system's not working for everyone. It's working. So when we think about even our educational system, it's designed perfectly to benefit certain groups of people, but not all people. So we all have this disproportionality. I hear that when we come to the teens. Well, and it's not just our school.
Right.
It's that should hit you in the gut. It should hit you in the chest and be like, oh, like there's something going on more systemically if it's not just happening in our school. And even if it is, right, that's not an excuse. But when you're talking about where do we get stuck, we just want to look at the data and then we just want to blame. Like we get there and we say, okay, well, yeah, we have disproportionality like everyone else has it too. What can we do about that? I hear that so often, right? Or we don't have the money, or it's the families, we can't reach the families. Again, that deficit ideology is so key. But if you continue a practice and your data continues to show you that that's not serving a group of people, then you change the practice. It's not benefiting. It's not this catch all, right? Like your tier one level support is not working. You can't just be all Black and brown or students with disabilities or students, ESL students that are in tier 2 and 3. That's problematic. Even looking at giftedness, we know that it's white and Asian students that are in giftedness. All of those things are problematic. If you have that risk ratio, asking yourself, what is the process? Like, if we're doing things the same way and getting the same results, we have to change things if we want to be equitable.
That's right. So, what are the traps? And I think Dr. Sessoms just highlighted how we can so easily fall into these traps. So, we wanted to make these pretty clear because we know that you've probably seen them, but may not have recognized that these are literally root cause traps that stall your work. So, belief gaps. We know that there are belief gaps. And when we say belief gaps, we're talking about bias based beliefs. So, thinking that, again, only certain students can have these outcomes, et cetera, deficit mindset, et cetera. Identifying belief gaps without process gaps, that's not good enough. So yes, we know that there could be bias at play, but as Dr. Sessom said, if we don't address then what we know and make a shift in the practice, which is process, then we can't say that we've effectively changed the system. And beliefs by themselves do not cause disproportionality. And I think that's important because sometimes people get hung up on, well, I can't change the way people think. Well, it's not about changing the way people think. It's about shifting some of their thinking. And in that shifting, addressing some of the things that we know to be happening through a process and policy lens. Secondly, identifying process gaps without the belief gaps. So this speaks to, and I love that Dr. Sessoms has highlighted Dr. Dina Simmons. Dina Simmons says there's a tension between equity and efficiency. And this is exactly what number 2 articulates, because what this says is we want to move so fast and we want to get things fixed so quickly that we're not taking the time enough to stop and say, but what could be potentially creating the process that we need to get to the root around? So improving efficiency does not answer why it's happening for certain groups. These last two really hit home for me. Process gaps that center on needing more services, and needing more services could be human capital, it could be financial, etc. And what Edward Fergus says is adding money to solve disparity really presumes that your core budget was never arranged for the neediest students to begin with. So what are we really saying when we say things like, well, we need the money to do that? Do ya? And why? Why hasn't the
Good.
system
Yep.
been set up enough that we're already addressing all students? And then identifying kids with gaps, quote unquote, as the problem. So seeing them as the cause, when in actuality, the cause is limited instructional and or school cultural or behavioral supports that are able to be responsive. So when I see that, what I think about, and I'm just going to be as blunt as possible, is hearing people say, oh, we got to prepare for learning loss. That's assuming that students lost because of what they did rather than the instructional disruption that happened as a result of COVID. So, not putting the onus on the students to make up their learning loss, but how do we create spaces where we're accelerating learning across the system instead of finding fault with them who really had no choice in the matter? So, those are the traps that could easily happen. Anything else, Doc?
Yeah, good points. It's really just really looking at how education has been set up to benefit dominant culture and not all people. And that's why it's failing certain bodies of people, because it's never was designed that way. So we have to start shifting and thinking about how do we prioritize their interests. That Dr. I'm losing his name, who always says that. He just spoke last week.
Oh boy.
Equity Literacy Group
Paul
Institute.
Gorski?
Paul Gorski talks about like prioritizing the interests of those that are most marginalized is really going to be key to doing this work.
And so root cause analysis should provide 3 areas of focus. So we did a level 1, 2, and 3. We like this too because we think you can take these 3 things and make sure that when you're evaluating your data, these 3 things are at their core. Numerical. So, what are the specific outcomes that you want to see by percentage, by score, by what have you, that will tell you that your root cause analysis can give you a goal to set? Social justice. So, what specific access and opportunity programs do you want to see change or do you want to see put in place? And then culture and belief. And so, I'm going to let Doc take that one because that is all her about naming.
Right. It's like naming and reducing those beliefs. Like that is really the work. So how I do this work is you can have the data practices as something that you need to be informing your work. So looking at root cause analysis, but we are going to do ongoing work monthly and looking at self-awareness because we have to do that part of it. Because if you want to just work on the data piece, as Nicole really emphasized a couple slides ago, that doesn't work. You have to do this all together. So that's really have to be a key part of that. All of this working in tandem. You can't have one without the other. All of them have to work together. So we're going to do ongoing work and working through those 3D power tools to really start unpacking the narratives you're telling yourself, because that's going to inform when you look at the data what you're going to make of it, right? So going back to that original thing, and when we're talking about what is it, what story are you telling the data? What story is the data telling you? And I think what Dr. Peterson, what he did, I love that he says when you look at the data that you don't even have the students' names. I'm like, I'm stealing that, Doc. That's so good, because
Right.
the bias, even in knowing the students in your building and how that creeps into, oh, they need to move up the tier. Don't even have their names, because that's another way to get around the bias. I think that's such a great practice.
I definitely agree. That was one I took from that session
Yes.
as well, that will at least begin the process of reducing the bias decision. And so, what we want to sort of leave you with is this thought about disproportionality being complex. It's not just about one teacher, it's not just about one group of people. It's so complex in our system and education as a whole. And so, a lot of what we've highlighted in our session has spoken to a lot of the things that you see here. So, we talk about expectation and misconceptions. We talk about cultural dissonance, which is that piece that Dr. Sessoms just highlighted, unpacking, wrestling with things that you thought were okay that maybe aren't, or thinking differently about certain people in a way that you may have not done before. Having those opportunities really help us understand where disproportionality may come from. And so this really just speaks to what contributes to disproportionality. So we know policies and practices, referrals like for special education or lack of referrals to gifted, instruction and assessment we've talked about, opportunity, just having the opportunity to be in an AP course or to be in an extracurricular activity, families and communities, that side of the street type deal, they're from this neighborhood, they shouldn't be able to access certain things. And then socio-demographics. So just who you are and where you're from, how does that contribute just by having the zip code that you do? So we wanted to just highlight that all of these things can play a role in all of the things that we do to really try to mitigate disproportionality as a whole.
We have
Yeah, it's
5 minutes.
complex. Thank you. It's
Mhm.
complex. Let's not just make it this technical solution. You have to look at this, at the complexities and the nuances of it. That's going to be key.
Absolutely. And one thing that we thought was important to showcase before we leave you was this bridge. And so, as you're thinking about data practices and what you can do around data that you have and obtaining results. So, remember, data rich, information poor. How do we get data rich and information rich? We have to cross this bridge. And it begins with PD. Professional development is that key starting point. And that then leads itself to what's called collaborative inquiry. So once we have the PD around how do we evaluate data, similar to what you're sitting through today, this was a snapshot of the types of PD that could support a database team. You need the structure of the bridge to sustain this move from data to results. So leadership and capacity, who is the leader at your table and how is capacity being built for the other leaders at that table? Structured collaboration. So I know that one of my colleagues, Shonda Talene, is on this call. She trains on team implementation problem solving. The TIPS model, there's a structured agenda, there's a minute taker, there's a structure to the entire process to reduce problem admiration. Frequent data use, not just looking at data once or twice, but monthly, quarterly, having a structured set of times that we're evaluating data. And then, how is that data informing our instruction? And in that instructional improvement, are we getting the results we want from not only the students, but our staff members? And how is it impacting our overall community? That bridge can't stand up without school culture, trust, or equity. And so, as Dr. Sessoms gave you those 3Ds, if I'm looking at this bridge, that's where 3Ds sit. It has to sustain the entire bridge by understanding all of those different power tools to ensure that we're making very equitable decisions that are supporting all. And so I'll let Doc take us out.
Yeah, and just thinking about this is where it really grounds the work, and thinking about Sonia Renee Taylor. If you've listened to any podcast during this pandemic, right, a lot of people have been listening to Brene Brown. And what I love about what she's doing is she's really modeling for people how to have the courageous conversations, especially dialogues on race with people who are Black and brown bodies, right? So this is really her, and she's grappling with the content, and she's like, I don't understand. And that is okay. So it's really a great model. But what I love even more is that this quote was credited to Brene Brown at first, and it really was for Sonia Renee Taylor. So thinking about Nicole and I as we do this work, and being that we're Black women and understanding the history of Black womanhood and being silenced and being invisible, that she used her position and her power to say, no, I'm going to highlight the person that actually said it, and bring her to the show. And what she said is just so key, and it resonates so deeply with the work that we're all trying to do. We will not go back to normal. Normal never was. Our pre-corona existence was not normal, other than we normalized greed, inequity, exhaustion, depletion, extraction, disconnection, confusion, rage, hoarding, hate, and lack. We should not long to return, my friends. We are being given the opportunity to stitch a new garment, one that fits all of humanity and nature. With that, we thank you very much.
Yes. And so we will leave you with our contact information. As we knew, we probably wouldn't have time for questions. But if you do have questions for us after today, please do not hesitate to reach out to us.